I'd like to now hand over the mic to Hannah Robertson from the Melbourne Airport Community Action Group, who will talk to us about the economic case that Melbourne Airport have proposed.
Thanks, Hung. Apologies for my voice, and I do hope that I don't break all your eardrums with a coughing fit while I try to get through this. So Melbourne Airport puts forward two main arguments to support their expansion. One is demand for travel, and the second is the economic benefits of expanding operations, including jobs growth that will flow to the state. Following on from what Frank has talked about on health, the major development plan takes jobs growth into account in measuring health impacts on local communities. The argument is that employment creates health benefits for the employed person and their household, and these benefits then offset the health detriments suffered by those directly exposed to aircraft noise, particulates, and other pollutants. So leaving aside the glaring inequity of using benefits that flow to one group to offset detriments flowing to another, we also question whether these economic benefits are as significant as they're claimed to be. Western Sydney Airport was promoted as offering a jobs bonanza to the local communities, but the Jobs for the West report found that the job forecasts were vastly exaggerated and may in fact only be 18% of the forecast number. A similar study of the claimed economic benefits of expansion at Heathrow Airport found it may actually be a net cost to the British economy. So these are just two examples of airports where the economic benefits that they've claimed will flow from their expansion have been challenged by independent assessments. We find it curious that Melbourne Airport are not making any of the studies, reports, or data underpinning their claims, including the health study and jobs forecast, publicly available. This would allow independent experts to validate their claims. Melbourne Airport is one of the largest, if not the largest, employer in this area, yet the West is an area of significant economic disadvantage. Indeed, Brimbank, the local government area where the new runway will have the most impact on communities, is Melbourne's second most disadvantaged local government area. So this begs the question whether the existing jobs at Melbourne Airport are jobs that bring dignity, prosperity, and future opportunity to local communities. And if not, will the new ones be? The master plan also forecasts that Melbourne Airport will contribute 4.5 billion to the Victorian economy by 2046. Now, counter to that, for example, according to the Bureau of Infrastructure, Transport and Regional Economics, the avoidable costs of traffic congestion in Melbourne alone will reach roughly 8 billion a year by 2030. And we all know that Tullamarine Freeway is a notorious Melbourne traffic bottleneck. So how much of that $8 billion will be traffic to and from Tullamarine Airport? Combining those sorts of costs with the cost to taxpayers to build the roads and rail links required to service Melbourne Airport's expansion amounts to a substantial economic burden. As for the money that tourism contributes to the economy, Australians spend more overseas than overseas visitors spend in Australia. So it's a net loss to our economy. And then we must factor in the costs in chronic health conditions, educational deficits, home insulation, climate change impacts, and the list goes on. I just want to turn briefly to the other justification for expansion, passenger demand. The master plan doesn't take into account the existing capacity at Avalon Airport that would be filled if Melbourne Airport doesn't grow, nor does it consider the jobs and economic benefits of expanding the rail network and developing high-speed rail so that we can travel through the cities we currently fly over and reduce the economic burden climate change poses by relying on less greenhouse gas emitting transport modes. I just want to close with something from a group called Safe Landing in the UK. It's actually made up of aviation sector workers who are deeply concerned that the aviation industry will face a cliff edge of sudden air traffic reduction that will cause a major industry crash if the aviation sector returns to business as usual post-COVID, instead of addressing the pressing need to reduce emissions across all sectors. So this ties in with what Mark was talking about earlier. They point out that this would result in massive job losses, not growth. And any cliff edge affecting the UK is going to affect Australia too. It will affect the global aviation industry. Safe Landing recommend following the precautionary principle, and so do we. If there is any doubt about the long-term viability of the sector in the face of the climate crisis, take the precautionary approach and invest in alternatives, or make do with what you already have until it's clear expansion can be viable. Similarly, if there is any doubt about the health and educational impacts of the new runway, take the precautionary approach and don't expand until the research is clear, because once the runway is built, it's too late. And you can just ask the people of Brisbane about that. We simply ask that the claimed benefits be independently verified before the project is approved, to give communities confidence that this project is compatible with the health and well-being of local communities and isn't driving the aviation sector to a cliff edge from which it may not be able to step back, or consigning our communities to a legacy of disadvantage that can never be remediated.
Thanks so much. Hannah, you've been running the Melbourne Airport Community Action Group for a while now.
It has been fantastic to find other concerned members of the community, both locally and indeed now we have a national alliance of groups, including representatives from Tasmania, Queensland, New South Wales. Victoria is heavily represented. We don't have anyone from WA or South Australia yet, but we hope to. So, you know, learning that communities around many of Australia's airports are facing very similar challenges, and getting very similar responses, and, you know, sort of the brush off. It's been quite empowering to join forces, and it's helped us to put together a more complete picture of how this all works, how we've all been kind of, you know, I hesitate to use the word deceived, but we have been kind of led into something that I'm not clear any community really understood is what we apparently have agreed to. You know, personally, I never agreed to anything, but there's just this sense that the community has been somewhat betrayed, and again, I don't like the word deceived, but misinformed, misled. The information is too unclear. One of the keys to expansion is that the Melbourne-Sydney air corridor is the second busiest air corridor in the world. Who would have thought there were that many people in Melbourne and Sydney that could be the case? But will that bounce back post-COVID, now that companies have discovered that they can hold meetings on Zoom and slash costs?
Yeah.
And, you know, I'd like to think there's going to be, I mean, we've never campaigned on climate change. That's not because we don't think it's a major issue of concern. It's just not what we started out to tackle. But I would like to think that corporations are going to come under increasing pressure to have much more responsible climate policies. And a key to that is going to be moderating their air travel.